The first time I noticed the circles, really noticed them, it was a Thursday morning that smelled like burnt toast and rain. I had over-buttered the toast because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. PTA meeting jitters, weather change headaches, or that low-lying hum I carry now, the one that started the day the doctor said autism, and then paused, waiting for my face to break. It didn't. It couldn't. My daughter doesn't deserve a broken mother. She deserves a translator. So I buttered the toast too much, and the rain tapped the kitchen window like a friend who didn't want to come in, and on the tile by the back door, my daughter had arranged her world again. Circles. They were everywhere. Ghost circles left by cups, loops traced in dust on the baseboard, coin rings in pockets, chalk hoops widowed from hopscotch. She'd drawn them again, in soft blue chalk this time. Wide loop after wide loop, not perfect but purposeful, concentric like ripples around a stone. She had started near the transition strip where our kitchen tile yields to the old oak of the hallway, as if the seam between one thing and the next was an invitation. She'd worked outward, stepping over her own lines like a tightrope walker, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, humming in that low frequency that only she and I seem to hear. "Breakfast bee," I said, because that's what I call her when the day needs gentleness. B for Bridget, for the saint I didn't believe in until I needed one. B for bees, for the way my daughter moves. Not straight, not random. The math of survival disguised as wandering. She didn't look up, but her humming swelled half a tone, acknowledgement as music. I placed the plate where she could see it without seeing me, just at the edge of the chalk ocean she was making, far enough that a crumb wouldn't land on a line. My mother says I spoil her, like kindness has an expiration date. My mother says children should be redirected. The occupational therapist calls it scaffolding. The special education teacher calls it meeting her where she is. And I call it what it is, learning the language of someone I would follow through any storm. So I let the circles grow, and the toast cool and the coffee go bitter while I listened to the rain and my daughter and that other quiet that lives in houses where a parent is always a little afraid. She ate one bite, then another, measuring the seconds between like beads. She touched the crust with the tip of her finger and then ran that finger along her nearest chalk loop as if taste and line were part of the same equation. On the third bite, she looked up. Not at me exactly, but at the space to the left of my shoulder, where she keeps a catalog of tiny truths. Hazel eyes, darker when it rains, a fleck of green above the right iris that makes strangers say pretty when they should say present. This is how she looks at me. As if my face were a familiar sky with new stars trespassing through. "Rain," she said finally. The word turned slowly in her mouth as if language were a stone to be warmed before you hold it. "It is," I said. "Listen." So we did. We listened to it gather, to it pool in the gutters, to it decide the day would go a little slower than we'd planned. We listened to the toaster cool and the refrigerator hiccup, and the neighbor's dog protest the audacity of thunder. We listened to the circles. People think chalk is silent, but it isn't when someone like B is drawing. It squeaks sometimes. Sure, a soft, frail sound that makes you think of chalkboards and shame. But most of the time it whispers, as if describing the floor back to itself. Here, and here, and here you are. By 9, the rain had convinced me to skip mascara. By 10, I had packed the tote I always pack now. Sensory toys, a cardigan that smells like home, earbuds, apple slices, the laminated social story I made for the doctor, the dentist, the fire drill. In the pocket inside the pocket, I keep a note addressed to a stranger. "She isn't ignoring you. She is trying to find you in a frequency you may not be tuned to." I pack it every time and have never given it to anyone. I keep it like a lighthouse. Today's meeting had been scheduled weeks ago, before the circles started to speak. The vice principal wanted to talk about behavioral concerns. The speech therapist had asked about functional communication. The school psychologist had added availability of attention. They all liked to stack nouns beside each other until they sounded like a staircase. The only word I wanted to stack was kind. But I put on my raincoat and slid into my boots, and when I turned back, my daughter had grown the circles past the hallway seam and onto the oak. "Not on the wood, Bee," I said, soft but firm, a phrase I repeat in grocery stores and waiting rooms and church pews. She paused, hovered, rerouted. She's better at detours than adults who talk about plans. The newest circles braided themselves back onto tile. She fitted a smaller ring into a larger one without measuring, velocity slowed by an intention I am learning to trust. "Okay," she said, in that flat musical way that means the okay is literal, not negotiable. A bridge constructed and crossed before I knew the river was there. She looked at my boots. "Wet." "Yes," I said, smiling, the relief like a match I cup with both hands. "Very." She slid to me along the edge of her chalk lake and pressed her forehead to my thigh for exactly one breath. "If you don't know her, you might miss this. You might think love requires eye contact and held hands and 'I love you' said like a doorbell. Sometimes, with Bee, love is a forehead against denim for one breath. Sometimes it's a circle that stops at the seam you asked her not to cross." We were late by the time we found our umbrellas. The rain had become a performance, not a commentary, the kind that makes streetlights look philosophical. Our town becomes a watercolor when it rains, passers-by turned brushstrokes, cars moving like the painter has sighed. I know how many faces remember Bee as the girl who screams at sirens. I know how many look away because their compassion has a shorter battery than my phone. Today, the rain tucked her under its noise, and I was grateful. At school, the halls were varnished with that disinfectant smell all institutions share. Hospitals, airports, classrooms, grief. The secretary smiled the way trained smiles do, precise and not quite arriving at the eyes. "You can wait in Conference B," she said, sliding a clipboard at me like a peace offering. I signed next to the line that says parent guardian and, under my breath, I repeated the only prayer I have that works. Let me show them who she is. Conference B had a rectangular table and chairs that knew knees better than spines. B moved to the corner and found the rolling cart with the tub of crayons. She is a connoisseur of corners. And I placed the cardigan for her to nest. The guitar. Vice principal came in first, then the speech therapist, then the psychologist with his legal pad, and finally the teacher, Ms. Emery, who is either the best person in this building or a great actor. She crouched near B, then didn't speak until B looked, then said, "You came back to our floor," as if B had climbed a mountain. B touched the sleeve of Ms. Emery's cardigan and hummed. "There are teachers who make space and teachers who take it. Ms. Emery gives oxygen." "We've noticed a pattern," the vice principal began, words square, collar tight. "During transitions, Bridget prefers the floor. During group time, she prefers repetitive drawing. During circle time," he looked at his notes, unaware of the irony. "She resists. She gravitates towards circular motion. She draws circles. She arranges objects in circles. She traces circles around her shoes." He looked up as if I might deny it. "She's learning to regulate a nervous system that is constantly negotiating with this room's noise," I said, calm because anger makes people think you're proving their point. "She's finding the loop she can finish when everything else is a line that won't end." The school psychologist nodded, pencil ready to name what I'd said in a more billable way. "Self-soothing through repetitive motor planning," he offered. "Language," the speech therapist added kindly, "can be shape before it becomes sound." B had found a fat blue crayon and was drawing on a scrap page the teacher slid her way. Big loops overlapping smaller loops. Eyes close to the paper, breath synchronized with the arc of her hand. Ms. Emery watched the way I watch, for pattern, for purpose, for when the crayon becomes a compass. "Tell me about the circles," the vice principal said, as if circles were a problem like gum under desks. "They're not circles," I said before I could stop myself. "They're returns." He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Anyone can draw a line," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my own mouth. A circle means you found your way back. Silence, the kind that has room in it. Even the rain paused to listen at the window. B's crayon slowed, then sped again, the rhythm of a heartbeat deciding to stay. The psychologist cleared his throat. Have you noticed any new triggers at home? Sirens, I said. The baby upstairs, the kettle whistle, the word hurry. And changes? The circles, I said. She's increased her circles. On paper, on dust, on air. In air? The speech therapist asked gently. She draws them with her finger, I said, when she's too tired to ask me not to go. Ms. Emery's hand moved toward the tissue box, then thought better of it. She has learned not to interrupt a mother's spine. I wonder if we could give her a circle time that is actually hers, she said softly. 10 minutes a day where a para sits with her while she draws and narrates shape as feeling. Would you sign permission for that? I nodded. I would sign permission for the moon if it meant someone saw my child. May I film her drawing? The speech therapist asked. For us to analyze pattern? On your phone? The vice principal added, already calculating policies. With mine, I said, protective in a way that embarrasses me and saves us. You can analyze the footage with me sitting there. Agreements, acronyms, the flurry of a plan that felt like hedge and hope at once. The rain remembered itself and resumed its tapping. Through it all, B drew. Blue on white, loop on loop, a child who doesn't speak often telling the room a story none of us had learned to read. And then something shifted. It came the way dawn does when you're too tired to notice you've stopped seeing your breath. Ms. Emery leaned forward. Not in the hungry way adults lean toward solutions, but like a friend squinting at a path you both forgot was there. Wait, she said. Look, at first I didn't understand. The circles weren't circles anymore. Not exactly. The outer loops had become wider, then softened at the sides, ovaling themselves like river stones. Inside them, B had left little empties, negative spaces that weren't holes so much as pauses. In two places, the empties were not quite symmetrical, one slightly higher than the other, flecked with the pressure of a crayon lifted and set down like a blink. Below them, a softer, longer curve was forming, gentled at the ends, not a circle but a shoreline. The speech therapist's hand found her chest. Oh, she whispered. Oh! B added two tiny arcs inside the upper empties, smaller loops nestled in larger, pupil like moon. Then she dragged the blue sideways on each, a flick of the wrist she uses when she wants light to be part of the drawing. She lowered the crayon and with the pad of her fingertip, smudged under the longer curve, feathering it the way I taught her to blend when we shade clouds. It wasn't a face yet. It wasn't even an outline, but it was a map that had finally admitted what landmark it led to. B? I asked, failing to keep the tremor out of my voice. What are you drawing? She didn't answer with words. She raised her free hand and touched her own cheek, then the air near my cheek, then the paper, as if completing a circuit. She leaned forward, close enough that her hair caught a bit of rain-laced light from the window, and she traced one last circle, small, precise, the kind of circle you make when you've practiced 1,000 imperfect ones to earn a true one. Right where a dimple would be, she sat back. The room forgot how to pretend it wasn't watching. The vice principal spoke first, because some habits outrun miracles. It appears she's drawing a face. Ms. Emery breathed out the word like it had petals. Someone's face. B turned the page 90 degrees and pressed the blue crayon into my hand. She looked at me then, really looked, past my left shoulder where she stores strangers, straight into the architecture I wear when I'm trying not to break. She lifted her pointer finger and tapped my chin once, then tapped the paper near that gentle shoreline curve, and said, uninflected as weather, certain as weather. Mama. I didn't cry. Not outwardly. My body did something quieter. It released the years I had kept tied short inside my chest. The room narrowed to a daughter handing a mother a color, a daughter who people call nonverbal, naming me in a different alphabet. I took the crayon because she asked me to, and because love is sometimes obeying small instructions with reverence. May I draw? I whispered. She nodded 3 times, as if she were letting me into a sacred place, as if I were a guest at the edge of her lake. I added nothing important, just a tiny freckle above where an eyebrow might be, where mine lives, a cartography of inheritance I have memorized in bathroom mirrors and late-night lullabies. I placed the mark small and true. B let me. Then she drew the circles again, thinner this time, like ripples around a stone that had finally named the center it came from. No one spoke. The rain finished its sentence and rested. Somewhere down the hall, a bell announced a transition. No one in that room moved. When we finally stood, the vice principal was different in the face, the way people are when a thing they don't have a word for has walked past their rules. He folded his notes and said thank you like a beginning. The psychologist wrote something I did not care to read. The speech therapist dabbed her eyes and called it shape language. Ms. Emery reached for B's hand and did not take it, just presented her own and waited. B put the crayon in it gently, and that was a handshake if you're fluent. On the way home, the puddles were mirrors and the sky had learned a lighter gray. B walked with her umbrella tilted toward the sound of water sliding off the edge, deliberate, content. When we reached the kitchen, she stepped carefully into her chalk lake again, and I saw it for the first time. She always started the circles where the light from the window touched the floor in an oval. She had not been drawing repetitions. She had been collecting suns. I texted my mother a photograph of the paper with the almost face. She wrote back immediately, "She drew you." A beat. Then, "She always was." I set the drawing on the counter and knelt beside my daughter. "Mama," I said, touching my chin, then the paper, speaking her lexicon back to her. She nodded once and laid her forehead against my shoulder for exactly 2 breaths. In our house, that's an essay. In our house, that's a vow. Later, after the rain made a last soft argument and moved on, after B fell asleep with blue chalk dust ghosting the lines of her palm, I sat on the kitchen floor where the circles had dried to a pale constellation. I didn't clean them. I won't tomorrow either. I traced one with my finger, then the next, and the next, until I reached the place where she'd drawn the small, perfect circle for the dimple I forgot I had, the one she must have found by counting smiles while I wasn't looking. People will say she was doodling. People will say what they always say when they are afraid their categories are smaller than a child. But I will remember the way the room held its breath when a girl who borrows our language built her own and offered it to us. The circles were never shapes. They were directions home, and today my daughter handed me the map with my face at the center as if to say, "You returned." I found you. After that day, the paper with her drawing never left the refrigerator door. I pinned it there with a magnet shaped like the moon, the one she always steals and hides under the couch cushions. The blue lines had already started to fade, chalk and crayon never meant for permanence, but I couldn't bear to seal it or scan it or touch it with varnish. Some things are holy precisely because they can vanish. B didn't look at it much after she made it. That's her way. She moves through moments like they're stones across a river. Touch, push, gone. But I kept catching her reflection in the kitchen window, watching the paper from the corner of her eye, as if she wanted to be sure it was still there before she let herself forget it. We were still learning to talk to each other in ways that didn't sound like language. The world calls her nonverbal, but that word feels too small, too empty. My daughter speaks. She speaks with rhythm and pause, with fingers and hums, with circles and proximity. She tells me everything, just not with words the rest of them listen for. The next morning, she started a new set of circles, this time on the porch. The sun had melted the last of the rain, and the air smelled of wet dust and electricity. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floorboards, chalk in both hands, blue in the right, yellow in the left, drawing 2 sets of loops that never touched but seemed to orbit one another. I brought her apple slices, then sat a few feet away, just close enough that she knew I was there. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Then I heard it. A tune hummed softly, repetitive, rising and falling in threes. Not random. I recognized the pattern. It was the melody I used to hum when she was still inside me. The The one I made up without realizing I'd made something. B, I said quietly. What are you singing? She looked up for half a second, sunlight cutting across her face like a whisper. Yellow, she said. Yellow? She pointed at the chalk in her left hand, then at the sun, then at my hair. Yellow. I laughed, the kind of laugh that breaks and heals in the same breath. Okay, yellow. She nodded once and returned to her circles. At therapy that afternoon, I told Dr. Harris about the drawing. He's kind in a way that doesn't feel practiced, which is rare for people who work with pain for a living. His office smells like cinnamon tea and patience. She drew your face? He asked, tapping his pen thoughtfully. She did. Or she drew what she remembers of it, I said. She didn't copy a photo. She drew, how I sound, I think. He smiled faintly. Synesthetic memory is common in some of our kids. Shapes, sounds, colors. Sometimes it's all one language. I nodded, watching Bee play with the sensory bin by the window, letting her fingers sift through dry beans. She wasn't listening, but she never needed to. She feels conversations like weather. She's communicating, I said. Not to the world, maybe, but to me. Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. That's what matters first. You're her interpreter, Nadia, and she's yours. That night, after Bee fell asleep, I took the drawing down from the fridge and laid it on the table under the lamp. I traced the lines lightly with my finger. The face, my face, was almost abstract, but the feeling in it was unmistakable. I saw myself the way she saw me, a shape of light, imperfect, a little crooked but alive. I wondered what she saw when she drew it. Did she think of me singing her to sleep? My hands braiding her hair? Or did she remember the times I shouted? The mornings when exhaustion made me sharper than I meant to be? I folded the paper and put it in the drawer with the bills and grocery lists. Not to hide it. To protect it. Because love that fragile deserves shelter too. Over the next week, the circles changed. They became less perfect, more like spirals. Sometimes she started in the center and worked outward. Other times she began at the edge and moved in, her small hand spinning tighter and tighter until the chalk snapped. When that happened, she didn't cry. She just pressed the broken piece into her palm and continued with what was left. Once I found her tracing circles on the fogged bathroom mirror after a shower. I stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt the ritual. The steam blurred her reflection, but I could see her expression, focused, soft, like prayer. When she noticed me, she didn't look startled. She simply reached out and drew a smaller circle inside the larger one, then pointed to me, then to her, then back to the circles. Together? I guessed. She nodded. Always, I said. She smiled. Barely there. But it was real. The school started calling it the drawing phase. They sent home a note asking if I could encourage more structured creative activities. Structured. As if the universe ever followed their lesson plans, I didn't argue. I never do anymore. Instead, I asked Ms. Emery for more chalk. She understood, but not everyone did. At the grocery store, a woman whispered to her friend when Bee began tracing invisible loops on the freezer door glass. Poor thing, she said loud enough to make it worse. It's so sad when they can't. I turned. When they can't what? I asked too calmly. The woman blinked. Speak. She just did, I said, and walked away. That night, Bee drew circles on my palm while I read her a story. Her fingertip was warm and deliberate, looping from the heel of my hand to the base of my thumb, again and again. What does it mean? I asked softly. She didn't answer. But when she finished, she pressed her palm against mine and held it there. Our lines didn't match, but they met. That was enough. One morning, I woke to the sound of chalk scraping wood. The sky outside was pale gray, dawn undecided. I found her in the hallway, sitting cross-legged, working quietly on the floor. But this time, the circles weren't blue or yellow. They were black. Thick, heavy lines pressed hard into the wood until the chalk crumbled in her fingers. Bee? I knelt beside her. What are you drawing? She didn't answer. Her breathing was fast, shallow. I could feel it, that tremor before meltdown. the world too loud inside her skin. I reached for her hand. "Hey," I whispered. "It's okay," she flinched. Her eyes darted toward me, wide, pupils shaking. Then she said something I didn't expect. Something she had never said before. "Gone." The word was small, almost inaudible, but it hit me like a door slamming. "Gone," I repeated. "Who's gone, baby?" She looked at me, then at the black circles, and said it again. "Gone. I didn't sleep that night." The word haunted the walls. Gone. What was she trying to tell me? A dream? A memory? Something she'd seen at school? The next day, I called Dr. Harris. He listened quietly, then said, "Sometimes, when a child begins to associate images with feelings, they'll express absence or fear through changes in color or repetition. Black circles might mean loss, but it could also mean transition, something ending, something beginning." "Like what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Has there been any change at home?" I thought about the missed calls from work, the unopened bills, the photo on the nightstand, me and Bee's father, smiling before life became a long corridor of goodbye. He hadn't visited in months. I stopped telling Bee when he said he would. It hurt less that way. "She misses him," I said finally, "even if she can't say it." "Maybe she just did," Dr. Harris said softly. That evening, I watched her draw again. The black circles had softened, blending with new blue ones, the colors bleeding into each other like storm clouds breaking apart. She didn't hum this time. She just breathed. I sat beside her and picked up a piece of chalk. "May I?" She looked at me, wary, then nodded once. I drew a small line through one of her circles. Just a little opening, a place to step through. "See?" I said. "Now it's not closed." She studied it, tilting her head. Then, slowly, she picked up the blue chalk and drew a line from the opening outward, curling it around my circle until it looped back into hers. "Together," I whispered. She didn't speak, but her hand brushed mine, and that was enough to tell me she understood. That night, when she finally fell asleep, I sat on the edge of her bed, tracing invisible circles on her blanket, whispering the rhythm she'd given me. "Gone," I said softly. "Doesn't always mean forever." And though I wasn't sure she heard, I knew she would one day. It was late April when Bee stopped drawing circles altogether. At first, I didn't notice. Life had a way of stealing my attention. The leak in the ceiling that turned into a dark patch above the sink, the stack of unpaid letters that looked like small tombstones of good intentions, the emails from work asking when I'd be ready to return. I wasn't. But not ready doesn't stop the world from spinning. The house grew too quiet in the mornings. No soft scrape of chalk, no hum of concentration. Just silence. That should have been my first warning. I found her in the living room one morning, sitting on the floor with her crayons still in their box. She wasn't drawing. She was staring at the paper as if waiting for it to speak first. "Bee," I said gently, "don't you want to draw today?" She blinked once, slowly, like the question was heavy. Then she whispered, "No." It was one word, but from her it was an earthquake. I called Dr. Harris later that afternoon. "She's withdrawn," I told him. "She stopped drawing. She barely hums." His voice came through calm but deliberate. "Has anything changed at home or school?" "Nothing new," I said. Then I hesitated. "Her father called last week." I didn't answer. He was silent for a moment. She might have sensed that. I looked toward Bee's room. She was sitting by the window, tracing the condensation on the glass with her fingertip. The light haloed around her head, and for a second she looked like a painting, still, tragic, and holy all at once. "She's seeing something I can't," I whispered. "Then meet her there," Dr. Harris said softly. The next day, I brought home new art supplies, pastel pencils, thicker paper, a tin of colored chalks. Bee opened the box, looked inside, then looked at me. "Different," she said. "Yes," I said. "Different can be good." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not good. Not same." She pushed the box away. That night, after she fell asleep, I stared at the paper still blank on the floor. The moonlight through the curtains cut it into two halves, shadow and glow. I sat there for a long time, until I realized I was crying without sound. The truth was simple and cruel. I missed her drawings because they were the only map I had to her mind. Without them, I was lost again. 3 days later, I woke to the sound of chalk. It was faint at first, a soft rhythm from the hallway, the familiar drag of wax against wood. My heart jolted with something that felt like relief. I didn't even put on slippers. I just went. She was there in her nightgown, sitting cross-legged by the wall. But it wasn't circles this time. Lines, jagged, vertical, dark, overlapping strokes that bled into each other. At first, I thought it was frustration, or maybe storm. But then I saw what she was doing. She wasn't scribbling. She was building. The shapes were faces, dozens of them, some clear, some distorted, some only eyes or mouths, layered over each other like memory pressed into the wall. "B," I whispered. She didn't turn. Her hand moved fast, fierce. She switched from black chalk to red, then blue, then back to black. She was breathing hard, almost panting. I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, what is this?" Her voice came low, almost a growl. "People. What people?" She stopped drawing and looked at me. Straight at me. Not through me, not around me. Straight. Her eyes looked older than mine. "Gone people," I froze. "Gone where?" She pressed her hand flat over one of the faces, smearing the lines until they blurred. "Here," she said. "But not." Her hand moved again, smaller strokes now, deliberate. Then she drew another face, alone, near the corner, smaller than the others. This one she didn't rush. The features were gentle. The lines curved inward. There was something painfully familiar about it. I didn't want to ask, but I did. "Who is that, B?" She didn't speak. She lifted her finger and touched my chest, right over my heart. Then she pointed to the drawing and whispered, "You." That night, I sat awake long after she'd fallen asleep, staring at the wall. The hallway smelled faintly of chalk and something older, like dust and rain that never dried. Her drawings of me were everywhere now, multiplying across the plaster. Some were abstract, some almost perfect. In one, the eyes were open wide and bright. In another, they were closed. I realized then what she was doing. She was redrawing me. Over and over, as if she was trying to decide which version of me still existed. I called Dr. Harris again. "She's drawing faces now, mine, dozens of them." He hesitated. "Faces can be mirrors," he said carefully. "Sometimes our children sense emotional shifts long before we acknowledge them." "Are you okay, Nadia?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that in months. I almost laughed. "I don't know," I said truthfully. Maybe I disappeared before she started drawing it. The next morning, Bea didn't draw. Instead, she sat by the wall, touching the chalk dust with her fingertips, smudging it into her skin. She pressed her palms together, rubbed them, then looked up at me. "Mama?" "Yes, love?" "You sad?" It wasn't a question. I sat down beside her. "Maybe a little." She looked down, her voice small. "Because gone?" I swallowed hard. "Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to come back." She thought about that for a long time, then took my hand and guided it to one of the faces on the wall. "Here," she said. "You here." I pressed my hand against the chalk lines. The dust smeared under my fingers, soft as ash. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here." That evening, I cleaned the wall for the first time. It felt wrong at first, like erasing her. But she didn't resist. She watched me quietly, holding a wet cloth of her own. "Help," she said. So we cleaned together, side by side. The water turned gray, the air thick with chalk and silence. When we were done, only faint ghosts of lines remained, shimmering in the last light of day. Bea stepped back, looked at the wall, then picked up a single piece of white chalk. She drew one large, slow circle, perfectly round this time, perfectly steady. Then she turned to me and said softly, "Now stay." I didn't know if she meant me or the circle or both. But I nodded anyway. I will. That night, I dreamed of the chalk faces. Not as ghosts, but as guardians. Watching, waiting, forgiving. When I woke, the light through the window fell across the floor in a perfect circle. Bee was already awake, sitting in it. She looked up and said, "You back." And for the first time, I believed her. It started again 3 nights later. Not with drawing this time, but with sound. A scraping, soft at first, like paper brushing stone. I thought it was a mouse or the wind, but when I opened my eyes, the faint glow of the hallway light slipped beneath my door. The sound came again. Scratch, pause, scratch. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Bee. Her breathing was steady in the next room. The air was colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that felt deliberate. The hallway looked the same, except it wasn't. The faint outline of the circle she'd drawn, the one she'd asked me to stay in, was gone. In its place was something new. Lines. White chalk again, but different now. Sharper, straighter, less fluid. They ran along the baseboard, up the wall, across the doorway, intersecting into patterns that looked almost geometric. And in the center of the floor, the tiniest shape, a square. Inside it, a smaller one, and inside that, one perfect circle. At first, I thought it was just her new pattern, but then I saw the faint smudge of a fingerprint pressed into the chalk. Too small to be mine. Bees. I turned, and she was standing at the end of the hall, her blanket trailing behind her, her hair a halo of sleep-tangled curls. "You made this?" I whispered. She nodded once. "What is it, Bee?" Her gaze moved to the wall, then to me. "Inside," she said quietly. "Inside what?" She pointed to the square, then to her chest. "Here." I crouched down beside her. "That's you?" She shook her head. "You." The next morning, she wouldn't speak at all. Not even one word. She sat in the kitchen staring at the refrigerator where her old drawing, the face she made of me, still hung beneath the moon magnet. The lines had faded more now, almost ghostly. I thought about replacing it with a copy, but something stopped me. She noticed me looking. Her voice, when it came, was flat. "It's going away." "What is, baby?" Her eyes flicked to the paper. "You," I froze. "I'm right here." She pressed her palms together, rubbed them hard. The gesture she uses when her mind is louder than the room. "You gone again," she murmured. I knelt beside her. "No, I'm not. I promise." But she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see. That afternoon, I called Dr. Harris again. My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. "She says I'm gone," I told him. "Children like Bee experience absence differently," he said. "Even emotional distance feels physical. Have you been distracted lately?" I thought about the bills, the job application I hadn't filled out, the ache in my chest I pretended was fatigue. "Maybe," I said. He sighed gently. "She might be sensing your withdrawal. When she says gone, she might mean disconnected. Try grounding her in something constant. Touch, sound, light. A ritual that says I'm still here. A ritual. That word felt heavy in my mouth. That night, I tried. We sat on the living room rug. I put a candle between us, the kind that smells faintly of honey and smoke. The light flickered across her face. "Can we make something together?" I asked. Her shoulders tensed. "No." "Okay," I said. "Then I'll start." I picked up a piece of chalk and drew a small spiral on the floor. Not a circle this time, not closed. A beginning without an end. She watched silently, her expression unreadable. "Your turn," I said softly. For a moment I thought she'd refuse. Then slowly, she reached for the chalk. Her small hand hovered over the spiral, hesitated, then added a second line next to mine. Almost parallel, sometimes touching, sometimes not. When she finished, she looked at me and whispered, "Hear it?" I frowned. "Hear what?" She tapped the chalk spiral with her fingertip. "It talks." After she went to bed, I couldn't stop staring at the spiral. The way our lines moved together, not perfectly, but in rhythm, like breathing. I leaned closer. the faint smell of chalk dust mixed with candle smoke. I brushed my hand across the spiral and felt something strange. A pulse of warmth, fleeting but real, as if the floor itself exhaled. It unnerved me enough that I wiped it away. But when I woke the next morning, it was back. Same shape. Same place. Chalk shouldn't do that. And in the center of the spiral, written in small, uneven letters, one word: stay. For days afterward, B drew in silence. She no longer made faces or random circles. Each drawing began with a square, then a circle inside it, then two short vertical lines above, eyes or maybe doors. I wasn't sure. She started calling them echoes. "What's an echo, B?" I asked one evening as she drew on the porch. She didn't look up. "When you forget you're loud," she said simply. Her words settled deep into me like stones dropped into water. That night, I found her awake past midnight again. She was drawing on her bedroom wall this time, not the floor. The moonlight lit her hand as she worked, whispering under her breath. Echo, echo, echo. The shapes were different now, faces again. But these weren't like before. These were clearer, sharper, and among them, a small figure standing alone. A woman. I stepped closer. The face she'd drawn was mine. But the body, it was hollow. No lines filled it in, just empty space. B. I said softly. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" She didn't stop. Her chalk scratched faster, her breathing quick. "You," she said. I swallowed. "Why don't I have a body?" She paused, turned, her eyes wide and wet. "Because you fade." My throat tightened. "What do you mean, baby?" Her voice cracked. "When you cry in the kitchen, when you look at the phone, you go gray. Like the wall." I sank to my knees beside her. "I didn't know you saw that." "I see everything," she said. Then, after a moment, "It hurts." Her words broke something in me. The quiet armor I'd built out of exhaustion and survival. I gathered her in my arms. She was stiff for a second, then melted into me, her fingers clutching the fabric of my shirt. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to fade." She nodded against my shoulder. "Then stay." "I will," I said, though I didn't know how yet. The next morning, I washed the chalk from the wall. I didn't want her to keep seeing my outline as empty. Instead, I handed her a clean sheet of paper. "Let's start again," I said. She looked uncertain. "What if it goes away?" "Then we'll draw it again." She studied me for a long time, then picked up the yellow chalk, the color of the sun, the color she once called my hair. She pressed it to the paper, slow and steady, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I looked at her new drawing. It wasn't a circle. It wasn't a face. It was two shapes intertwined. A small figure holding a larger one by the hand. The lines were shaky, but unmistakable. Mother and child. The caption, in uneven letters, said, "Not gone." I cried quietly on the kitchen floor that night. Not the desperate kind of crying that shakes you, but the kind that comes when you realize someone smaller than you has seen you better than you've seen yourself. I wanted to believe her. That I wasn't gone. That I could still stay, and maybe for the first time I really did. The morning it happened, the air felt strange, like the world had paused between breaths. I woke to sunlight on the floorboards, long and warm and almost golden, the kind of light that forgives. For the first time in months, B wasn't in her room, and the silence didn't scare me. It felt intentional. Her blanket lay folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The crayons were gone, and on her pillow was a single piece of chalk, white, worn to half its size, the edges smoothed by her fingers. I followed the faint trail of dust down the hall and into the kitchen. She was there. Sitting cross-legged by the refrigerator, in front of the old drawing, the one she'd made of me. The paper was almost colorless now, its blues faded to the ghost of sky, but it was still there. Still pinned by the moon magnet. "Good morning, B," I said softly, careful not to disturb the air around her. She didn't look up. She was tracing the outline of the paper's shadow on the floor with the chalk. A quiet loop, deliberate, patient. Her hair fell across her cheek like a veil. "What are you making?" She kept drawing, the circle widening, the chalk whispering against tile. "A door," she said. "A door." She nodded once. "For you." I crouched beside her. "A door for me to what?" She stopped drawing. Looked at me, really looked like she had when she first said mama. "To come back," she said simply. Something inside me broke. The kind of breaking that feels like air rushing back into lungs after years underwater. "B," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I never left you," she tilted her head. "You did, but not now." Her words didn't sting this time. They just landed, soft and true. She stood up, brushing chalk dust from her hands. Then she pressed one small palm flat against my chest, right over my heart. "Here," she said. "Still warm." We spent the rest of that morning drawing together, not circles, not faces, but lines, threads of color weaving into one another, blue into yellow, yellow into red, red fading into white. It wasn't art. It was language. At one point, she paused, picked up a new piece of chalk, and pressed it into my hand. "Your turn," I hesitated. "What should I draw?" She smiled, barely but enough. "Draw what you see." I looked at her, really looked, the smudge of chalk on her chin, the curl of hair stuck to her forehead, the steady concentration in her tiny fingers. I began with one line, then another, a hand. Small, open, reaching. When I finished, she leaned closer and added one more line, her own hand reaching back. Together, they formed a circle. Not perfect, not even, but complete. That afternoon, I took her for a walk. The air smelled of wet earth and laundry soap from someone's backyard. The sky was pale and forgiving. Bea walked beside me, one hand in mine, the other holding her piece of chalk like a talisman. At the corner of our street stood a cracked section of sidewalk she loved, the one she always stopped to draw on. She knelt down, dropped her backpack, and began tracing. "What are we drawing today?" I asked. She looked up, smiling now. "All of it." "All of what?" "The world," she said, as if it were obvious. And she began. Wide blue arcs, golden loops, white spirals. The shapes spilled across the concrete like constellations. I watched her, my throat tight, and realized she wasn't just drawing circles anymore. She was drawing connections, bridges, returns. People slowed as they passed. Some stared. Some smiled. One woman whispered, "She's talented." I wanted to say, "No, she's telling the truth." When we came home, the house felt lighter. Bea went straight to the refrigerator and took down the old drawing. She laid it flat on the table and ran her fingers over it. "It's tired," she said softly. "Do you want to make a new one?" I asked. She nodded. I gave her a clean sheet of paper. She looked at it for a long time before picking up the chalk. This time, she didn't start with a circle. She started with two faces, side by side, one small, one larger. She filled the space between them with soft, swirling lines, almost like wind. Then she pressed her palm in the middle, leaving a faint print. "Us," she said. My chest tightened. "Yes, us." She looked up at me and added one last word in uneven letters beneath the drawing. "Stay." That night, after she was asleep, I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her breathe. The moonlight brushed her face. She looked peaceful. Her small hand rested on her chest, right where she'd touched mine earlier, and I realized that for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Of her. Of me. Of everything we'd said without words. I went to the kitchen and looked at her new drawing on the table. The chalk dust shimmered faintly under the lamplight, like the surface of the moon. I didn't pin it to the refrigerator. I framed it, because it wasn't just a picture. It was proof that she saw me even when I disappeared. Proof that she found me again, even when I didn't know I was lost. Proof that love, in its truest form, always draws itself back to center. The next morning, When Bee woke, she came running down the hall, barefoot and beaming. "Look," she said, pointing at the window. Outside, the rain had begun again, but this time, instead of retreating from it, she pressed her palm against the glass and drew a circle in the fog. "Door," she whispered. I smiled. "To where?" She turned, her eyes bright, and said, "To always." I pulled her into my arms, and for a long moment we just stood there, breathing together, the world soft around us. The chalk on the table, the circles on the glass, the faint echo of her hum, they all felt like heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. Circles aren't about endings. They're about coming home.